Rapport family? We're back with another great edition of Building Rapport. Joining me, hasn't been here in a while. He's been busy. He's been hot out there in these college football streets. Josh Pate from the Late Kick, CBS 247. Josh, thanks for joining me, man. I want to jump right in. Look, a lot has happened so far this offseason, including Auburn's massive recruiting momentum. Auburn has landed five-star Perry Thompson, wide receiver out of Alabama. It seems Hugh Freeze is putting some people on notice that you can no longer come into the state of Alabama, pluck who you want, and then leave the state like a bandit. You have mentioned during the Harsin era that you can't outdevelop Nick Saban and Kirby Smart. It's not going to happen. Talk about the job that Hugh Freeze is doing right now in recruiting and how that's going to help him catch up to what his rivals are doing across the state and across the state lines.
It looks different around here since last time I was here, by the way. This place looks wonderful. Love it. I'm not talking about my apartment either. So I won't waste time with the backstory because Auburn folks watch this show. So Auburn folks know Auburn. Like nationally, you have to spell out what the dynamic is at Auburn. So when we were talking last time and when we were talking about not being able to outdevelop Auburn or Alabama, it never meant, Auburn, led by Brian Harsin or Gus Malzahn or Hugh Freeze or anyone, Auburn can't do better at developing a player or a position. It just meant if you were planning on out-scheming your way to Atlanta and you always had Bama and Georgia on the schedule, they're good at recruiting and developing and scheming. So you were never you're never going to get a massive edge on them. So when Hugh Freeze, right before he was hired, I did a segment on Late Kick, took a ton of flack for it, I think from people who probably weren't as knowledgeable about Auburn. And I said, Auburn's probably the toughest Power 5 job out there when you factor in expectation level and the challenge, but also I think it's the most underrated job. The first part most people agree with. The second part got a lot of disagreement on, but that's because, Mike, I don't think people knew what was being withheld down there. With the previous administration or with the previous staff, I don't know that folks were aware of how many deep-pocketed people just flat out said, you're not getting my money.
Yeah, we're not supporting Brian Harsin. Yeah.
Well, that doesn't mean the money doesn't exist. It just means it wasn't available. And so all of a sudden, I'm looking at it and I'm saying, well, if they do hire the right guy, if they hire the guy that gets the sign-off from the proper authority, so to speak, it's like you're sitting on a massive war chest, which is NIL today. That's what that is. And with Perry Thompson, with DeMarcus Riddick, the two kids they just flipped from Bama and Georgia, respectively, that was a major factor. It used to be dirty to talk about that. Now it's just out in the open and you can talk about it. It's funny how people still use it in a pejorative context, like that's not how you're supposed to recruit. So anyway, now the go-to, you've already heard it if you're an Auburn fan, the go-to from the Georgias or Alabamas, if you flip a kid they wanted, is either, well, we knew it was coming, like that's supposed to soften the blow, or number two, we'll recruit over him, which God bless you if you do, or number three, and this is the most popular one, oh, he'll be a bust down there, or they had to use different tactics than us. Well, let me address the first one. Let's say they are busts. Let's say 3 years from now, you and I have never even seen Perry Thompson or DeMarcus Riddick start a game. I doubt that's the case, but let's just say worst case scenario, benefit of the argument or doubt.
That's a common story at Auburn, Josh.
Yeah.
5 stars going to Auburn to die.
Yeah. So let's just say it happens. Mm-hmm. I'm a believer it's still a massive win for Auburn because I don't think 3 years from now, people will look back and say, hey, remember when Hugh Freeze flipped Perry Thompson or DeMarcus Riddick? I think people will look back and they'll say, remember how Hugh Freeze got to Auburn and immediately he flipped 5-star kids from Alabama and Georgia. Now, those kids may or may not pan out. We have no clue. But I think even in the worst case of scenarios with Auburn, if they don't pan out, you know as well as I do, the ripple effect of perception and the ripple effect of messaging when you do something like that matters because people don't care about the kids individually. And I mean, just the general public. They care about what kind of message it sends. And the message that you have to be sending if you're Auburn is, yeah, we can actually compete with the ones that we used to have to just bow down to and take scraps from when it comes to recruiting and in portal. And when you can combine those two things, I think you see why a lot of people weren't so comfortable when Hugh Freeze came back in the SEC. They pretended it was because of off the field stuff in the past. That's not why they were uncomfortable. That's just what they said. They're uncomfortable because they know he's going to be able to acquire talent and probably win with it.
Yeah, listen, you need the Jimmies and the Joes to compete at this level. So one of the things we talk about on the show is that maybe Nick Saban and Kirby Smart have the leeway to not be the best on-field game managers because they go out and they get five-star talent that comes in a little bit more ready-made and can just make plays instinctively. They're just football players. You go out and you get football players that can come in and make up for what maybe bad decisions you may make as a coach. Josh, remind me on NIL, I mean, you've been pretty outspoken about playoff expansion and how you feel those things may not necessarily help people catch up to the Georgias and the Alabamas of the world. I've been pretty adamant that if you didn't have money before NIL, you're not gonna have money now. So, like, this has kind of grown, in my opinion, the gap between the haves and have-nots. Right? If you were Nick Saban, you didn't need NIL to be successful before. You were already winning championships. Kirby learned how to do it. Now the money is out there for maybe some programs who were right behind them to snag a player or two. But, has NIL positively affected the teams on the lower end of the spectrum, or is it still a net negative for them?
I would say if you're looking at competitive balance, it's probably equal or a net negative. Mm. The hope out there, and you and I have spoken about this before, I fundamentally disagree with the field that college football playoff expansion, when we go to 12 teams and all of a sudden a 9 seed can say we made the playoff, or a 10 seed like a Baylor any random year can say, hey, come here and you can make the playoff. That is not closing the gap. You talk to more of these kids than I do. How many of those kids look at you and say, Mike, I'll tell you what really matters to me when I'm choosing my college destination? It's playoff access, because I haven't had one bring it up. Right. Down the road, when you get to like rung 6 or 7 or 8 of their priority ladder, it may come into play. That is not what kids are talking about. It's one of the most fundamental misunderstandings between casual fans and the actual like nuts and bolts of recruiting. For casual fans, think what you care about is what that player cares about. And that's never been the case. And added playoff access is never going to fundamentally change that dynamic. 2 things change that dynamic. One of them is out of your control. One of them is in your control. So one thing is having proper alignment, because there is enough money. There are enough resources in several programs where if it got funneled and channeled the proper way, you could make a difference. A lot more than having playoff access. And the second one, which is out of your control, is ironically, even if you're not a fan of any of these schools, it would help a lot of college football if the big 3 in Florida and Texas A&M and USC got their act together. Even if that meant them keeping more of their in-state talent home, doesn't mean you get it. But what it does mean is Alabama or Ohio State or Clemson or Ohio State don't disproportionately raid those states,
right,
and then use those players to beat you into the ground when they play you.
Well, I'll tell you what, it has turned into something that Greg Sankey addressed at Media Days. You and I were both there, and he talked about how NIL has maybe become something that they never intended. And that alignment at the state level may be necessary to kind of get things in order. But he talked about bad actors. Greg Sankey did. He talked about bad actors in NIL coming into the student athletes' lives. A lot of coaches have been very outspoken about trying to manage that, when the spirit of it has been, you're supposed to not really be that involved. It's supposed to be kind of like a free market where the coaches are not that involved, but they seem pretty involved. Like, how do we get this thing functioning the way it's intended, which is student athletes being able to take advantage of financial opportunities based on the market value they've created for themselves, and coaches still coaching football and not worried about the money that's flying around their athletes?
So the short answer is I don't have an easy answer for you. I do go back a few years when this was sort of on the table, and anyone who's followed the sport for a while will remember this. Everyone had their own opinion. You can think of yours, I can think of mine. Now, my opinion sounded like this. I am for players being able to capitalize on NIL. I think my stance is probably the overwhelmingly popular stance on this front. I said, I am all for them being able to do that. But you need to be careful, because it feels like we just jumped into it out of nowhere. And there were no checks and balances put in place. So you saw a slippery slope there. And instead of being the parent and saying, careful now, careful, it's like everyone was the kid saying, woo. Well, the thing about a slippery slope, Mike, is once you go down it, you're down it.
You're down it.
And
Yeah.
what I don't like is the same people who wanted to run past the caution signs when people like me were saying, you need to be careful with this. They said, oh, no, you're a stick in the mud. You don't want those players to have rights. And then they go down the hill, and then you're looking at them screaming, help me, help me. And they look at you and they say, all right, what now? You're the one with all the answers. What now? I don't have an answer now. That's why they call it slippery instead of just the slope. Once you go down it, that's where we are right now. You got folks asking Congress to help you with NIL legislation and offer antitrust exemption. And by the way, those of us who just want to talk football never got into this space to be talking about antitrust legislation for name, image, and likeness in college football. But yet, there we are. So look, here's the other thing I'll say, though. Everything's not a 10. Like, I actually talked to Nick Saban about this the other day. Everything is not an existential crisis to the sport. I know everything's turned up to 10 because people have to generate traffic and whatnot. But it's sometimes presented a little more hyperbolically than it is. NIL is not perfect by any stretch right now, and it's kind of a mess. And certainly it was always going to be used as an inducement. If that shocked anyone, that's just naivete. That is not something that came out of nowhere. Right. But at the same time, the sport hasn't burned to the ground yet. And as far as I can tell, Mike, if you didn't know NIL was in place, you look at the recruiting rankings today and look at them 10 years ago, they look pretty much the same. So if you didn't know any better, if you just watched on Saturdays in the fall, Saturdays look the same to me. And as long as that's the case, it doesn't mean we're problem free, but it doesn't mean the sport's burning to the ground.
Yeah, look, recruiting is the lifeblood of college football. In the SEC, Auburn, after landing Perry Thompson, jumped to, depending on 247, has them ranked around 17 in the national rankings. But Josh, that's still only 7th in the SEC. So they still have a ways to go to catch up. Now, most of the schools ranked in front of Auburn right now, they've earned that ranking by volume, right? Like, it just got more recruits under their belt. So as Auburn starts to fill out the back end with 3 stars, with some 3 stars, I hope, but hopefully for Hugh Freeze, more 4 and 5 stars, they will catch up. Now, Hugh Freeze said this. He made this statement. He said, if we're not in the top 7 in recruiting by year 3, everybody here is going to be looking for a job. I thought it was a pretty wild statement, but I think it underscores that he understands you have to go out and you have to get talent to compete with the top dogs of the conference. Conference will not be the same next year, Josh. Texas and Oklahoma join, and divisions are going away. How does that affect what Hugh Freeze is doing with those 2 teams joining the conference? But now you truly have to be top 2 in the conference. You can't backdoor your way into an SEC championship because you won the division on a weak year, right? How does it change his mission as a coach trying to get Auburn back to the SEC championship?
Hey, first off, you should be proud of me because you gave me 3 pregnant pauses there, and I didn't jump in. And we were at Big Ten Media Days the other day, and Ryan Day was answering a question, and he gave me a pregnant pause, and I started to talk. And as I started to talk, I saw his mouth had started to open, and so I had to stop myself. I said, "Oh, you weren't even done with the last answer, were you? Please continue." They didn't even cut it out of the interview when they posted it on CBS.
I believe
they just hung me out to dry. So yeah, so we've improved. All right. I think it's really interesting the way Freeze answered that question that you mentioned there, because on one hand, you don't want to envision your coach checking recruiting rankings every time they land a kid because you want them to trust their own evaluation. At the same time, I think one of the most non-productive attitudes you can have and damning attitudes you can have as a coach is to openly have like contempt for star rankings and recruiting, because by and large, the rankings line up with the talent pool.
They do.
And so you need to embrace that stuff. So he embraced it. I would like to have my coach sound like that. With OU and Texas coming in, from a conference footprint standpoint, it's a big deal. From an overall recruiting standpoint, if you just pretended there are 130 whatever teams out there and realistically 30 of them could land a top 10 class in a given year, I don't know that the recruiting will look all that different because they already recruit the same players. I think probably the net result is Texas finds it easier to come into states like Mississippi, Alabama, and Georgia for line talent. I think that most of the Southern schools are already recruiting Texas. So I don't think that's going to make much of a difference. I think Oklahoma will probably be a bigger beneficiary because while Brent Venables, although they didn't win on the field last year, he's done a really good job recruiting Texas. If they get into some of those states, Louisiana also among them, for O-line, D-line talent, that's where the biggest help there will be. But with Hugh Freeze and Auburn, I think their recruiting strategy will be the same as it has been. And I also think, not to tie everything to this year, but I think you and I had the same conversation. I have the same conversation anytime a new staff is in. You set the expectation level wherever it is. If they overachieve year one, to me, that is one of the biggest lightning rods for recruiting you can have. It doesn't mean you have to have it, but if you do have it, everyone who's negatively recruited against you as their initial strategy gets to look at that now, or your staff gets to look at their record and they get to say, hey, all the stuff they told you about us, that's all it was, is stuff. Look, we don't even have you on our roster yet. We don't have classes full of you. We took whatever was left. We scrapped together what we could from the transfer portal, and here's what we are right now. So imagine what we could be. It's the same recruiting pitch you would always use, but I think they'll be able to use it effectively.
But what does that look like in year one, though? Like, what kind of record? How do you achieve enough success to do what you're talking about, but not maybe overset expectations? Look, Gus's first year, national championship. They never even came close to reaching those heights again. And as a matter of fact, I would argue he was probably one of the most massively underachieving coaches in the SEC in recent history based on perceived recruiting success. Top 10 classes. Auburn was one of only schools during the playoff era to average top 10 recruiting classes under a coach, but not make the playoff, Josh. They came close in 2017, but they blew it against Georgia in the SEC championship game, where they absolutely would have gone to the playoff if they had won that game. So what is a reasonable year one expectation that achieves what you're talking about, but does not maybe set you up for failure? Because we've seen this story with Arkansas, where they had a real good year, but sustained success is difficult in this conference.
Yeah, I think it's not necessarily a win total. So you could throw 7 or 8 wins out there. Let's just throw 8 wins out there. But to me, I would infinitely rather have a 7-win season where my losses to Georgia and Alabama are competitive in the fourth quarter than I would an 8-win season where I got completely dump trucked by 3 or 4 teams. Because that means I can take our staff and I can take our sports staff and we can reasonably sell to a kid. We are 1 more or maybe 2 more or maybe a recruiting and a transfer portal class away from turning those close losses into wins. Now, like you said with Arkansas, that never guarantees anything, but that's not how you recruit. You trust yourself that when you do add that talent, we won't be in Arkansas. Like we will go over the cliff instead of just walking up to it. That's the confidence you have to have. I don't doubt they have it. I'm just saying there will be doubters out there. If Auburn were to go 8-4 this year and all 4 losses were by 7 points or less, they would be on the cover of a bunch of preview magazines next year. Their staff would absolutely take that on the trail and sell it to kids. And you would have detractors saying, well, maybe that's the best he'll ever do. Remember Malzahn year 1? Remember Arkansas? Don't bring up those. You just listen. That's every year. You're going to hear that stuff every year about someone. So what you would much rather have is that than go 4-8 and be an afterthought and no one's even taking you seriously.
Are the 2 wins that Hugh Freeze has against Nick Saban, do you think that's an effective recruiting pit? Like, listen, and he's in the short club. We joked about this when we interviewed him. Like, hey, man, you guys got special Dakota rings or jackets. You beat Nick Saban twice in 2 years in a row. And not a lot of coaches can claim that. How effective is that saying I know how to beat him? I have maybe more resources at Auburn than I did at Ole Miss. And if I have you, we can beat him often.
I think it's huge. And I don't think anyone ever has to remember how it happened. Like I was at that 5 turnover game, that -5 turnover game for Alabama. Some of the craziest stuff I have seen things happen in a pinball machine that made more sense than what I saw in that game. But it doesn't matter. The further removed you get from it, people just remember we went into Tuscaloosa when they had us circled because we beat them the year before and we beat them again. We never recruited heads up against them. We never had equal rosters or equal classes. And by the way, Alabama, I believe, played for the title both years that happened and won the title one of the years that happened. So they were at the apex of their dynasty, and we took them head on. We can do it again. Yeah, I think that absolutely works.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see. I think the pitch changes. Hugh Freeze has talked a lot about asking for patience and wanting people to understand that it takes time to build a winner. But there is an opportunity here with some of the players that he has, Jarquez Hunter, if he can get one of these quarterbacks, Peyton Thorne or Robbie Ashford, to play, at an above average level, they could find success. The year one schedule is favorable. Year one schedule is favorable. It's about as favorable as he could have asked for in year one, if you ask me.
It's so funny. It's so funny how we learn to grade on a curve at Auburn. Like at Michigan, they don't play a team that will be with much of a pulse until November. And at Auburn, we're looking to saying, well, yeah, we got Georgia, we got A&M, we got LSU, we got Bama, but hey, a couple of them are at home, so at least we got that.
Right. It's interesting. I think that this is maybe the easiest schedule. This is only the third time in the last 10 years that they've had a strength of schedule ranked outside the top 10.
I'm interested to see who's ranking the strength outside the top 10. Like in the NFL, I think people inappropriately apply NFL schedule metrics to college. Okay. In the NFL, every win and every loss is just equal. In college football, a loss means 10 times what it means in the NFL. So if you play Alabama and Georgia, and you play 10 high school teams, to me, that's a tougher schedule. And let's throw LSU in there. That's a preseason top 5. So Auburn realistically could be playing 3 top 5 teams, preseason top 5 teams. If you didn't play anything, if you literally played like Beauregard High School 9 other times with those 3 teams, that's a tougher schedule than someone else who plays half a dozen teams ranked in the 20 to 40 range. But the strength of schedule folks will tell you, oh, no, that schedule can't be tough because they've only got 3 ranked opponents. Yeah, where are they ranked? Like, what are they capable of? How powerful are they? So you're not going to convince me there are 10 tougher schedules than Auburn out there, but I get your point.
Yeah, I mean, listen, when you got Alabama and Georgia on the schedule, it's tough every year. I think they got both those games technically at home this year. So we'll see how they do with that. Georgia, not having to play Georgia in November, possibly an advantage for Auburn.
How about the Tennessee game is that game now? They go to Tennessee. Georgia, Tennessee's the second to last week of the year.
Oh, man, just some brutal schedules. Going into 2024, Florida has probably the hardest schedule I've ever seen. Was it 11 Power 5 opponents?
I couldn't believe it, man. I looked at that thing. It goes back. Look, it's a whole. We could go an hour on this, but my whole thing about folks bashing the SEC because you won't voluntarily play 9 conference games. It's the same crowd that when you get to December, they want to yell at you. You are what your record says you are. Like, yep. Listen, I don't think Florida's probably going to flirt with the playoff next year. But, Mike, there is a 9-3 scenario where I think that's a team that deserves the playoff. Because there's a 9-3 in their cards that would impress me a lot more than an 11-1 or 12-0, and especially a G5 12-0. But yet I would have people say, no, you can't even put a 2-loss team in over an undefeated. Well, okay, if you're going to yell that at me on the back end, don't be telling me to schedule tough on the front end. If you think all wins are equal and all losses are equal, why don't I just go independent and play 1 or 2 marquee games a year and rest up for them and put UT Chattanooga in front of them if I can count on you to criticize me in August, but then defend me in December? That's always been ridiculous.
Yeah, definitely. Josh, I want to close out asking you a couple questions. Auburn's record, we talked over under last year, and you and I, we were aligned on where we thought they could finish, and then they hit the under solidly. This year, give me a win floor for Auburn and a win ceiling for Auburn.
What did we say last year?
It was 7 wins. It was 7 wins last year. Yeah.
Have you gone on record already?
Yeah, listen, I think personally that 6 should be the floor for a $6 million coach. That's just my personal opinion. They won 5 games last year in absolute chaos, and they fired their coach midseason. The schedule is favorable, and I really believe 6 should be the absolute floor. But if all things go well, I think Hugh Freeze can squeak 8 wins out of the schedule.
Yeah, so I'm 5-7 as the floor, so I'm 1 below you on the floor. But I think I'm probably 8 wins. I think we're aligned on the ceiling. If there's 7 or 8 wins, listen. The only other question I would have, almost knocked my laptop down. The only other question I would have in the 7 or 8 win scenario is, It's a win either way. What did the losses look like? Which
Yeah.
goes back to what we talked about a little while ago.
Yeah. What do the losses look like? They've got to be competitive, and you've got to put something on the field that shows proof of concept. I saw a DM from Antonio Brown to Perry Thompson, kind of like, "Little bro, what are you doing? Why are you going to Auburn?" And I didn't really understand it, Josh, because in my head I'm thinking, well, those are different coaches. So yeah,
Right.
the school has a history maybe of not doing great with wide receivers, but this is a different coach. DK Metcalf, Hugh Freeze had DK Metcalf FaceTime Perry Thompson to talk about why he should come play for Hugh Freeze. So it'll be interesting to see if they can put that proof of concept on the field, if that manifests itself in the win totals and the win ceilings that we're talking about, and then how he can parlay that into recruiting going into 2025 and beyond to get the Jimmies and the Joes that he's going to need. A couple more questions here, Josh, before we get out of here. The people want to know, when you get elected college football commissioner, what will be your first act as college football commissioner? I've seen you say a lot of different things, but we got to get you on record as what your first act will be to help get this thing going the right direction.
So there are going to be several day one initiatives. Number one, I'm really tired. I'm really tired of field turf. Really tired of neutral site games. Sometimes those coincide. I despise the fact that we play our title game on a Monday night, and also I don't like the calendar. Now, the calendar is going to be a day one proposal that I'll have to get feedback on. But like, I think future scheduling is a joke, Mike. I wish we could do it like the NFL. And I'm never one of those dudes who says college should look like the NFL. I actually despise that argument. But the NFL does get how scheduling should be an event. Schedule releases should be an event. And instead, you just randomly find out on a Tuesday in June, Auburn's going to play at UCLA in 2031. I can't stand that. So yeah, I wish that we could do those things. If you asked me this 30 minutes ago, you never would have gotten another question in. I could just go and go and go and go and go.
Fair enough. To close out, Josh, I've been getting back in shape. The people want to know. I want to know, where can I go get the best muscle tee on the market to show off all my hard work?
Oh man, since none of them have sponsored me yet, I'm not going to spend any time on one of them. but I will say this. So I will spill this here, and we just need to keep it between us on the channel, please.
Okay.
So I get asked literally daily, sometimes several times a day, where do you get your white t-shirts? Because people think they're special made, they're custom, and in reality, let me lean in a little bit. I just order them in bulk off Amazon. That's all I do.
Amazon,
they're just the Amazon tees. But I will say there is a company called Built. It's like BYLT. I like their t-shirts, but they won't sponsor me. So why in the world would I talk about them anymore?
Yeah. I mean, listen, Built, if you're listening, Mike G, Josh Pate, we'll tag team this thing, baby. Let's get this going. We'll show off the muscles. Guys, I want to thank Josh Pate for joining me. Always a great conversation, Josh. Tell the people where they can find you, where they can listen to you, what you got going on these days.
Yeah, you're not going to get better Auburn coverage than you are right here, obviously. But if you get your Auburn fix, then you want to zoom it out a little bit, see what's going on with the rest of the country. Late Kick is on YouTube. Late Kick is anywhere you get podcasts, and on social media, it's at Late Kick Josh. Pretty much anywhere you want to go, and we do it year round, man. And we just stick with college football. I know some people say they do. We actually just stick with college football, and we'd love to have you be a part of it.
Definitely. Guys, that's it for another great edition of Building Rapport with our guy, Josh Pate from the Late Kick. If you want more content like this, please hit like and subscribe. We are the War Rapport on every social media platform. TW Rapport on TikTok. We're signing off, and as always, Warrior.